Welcome to the Supplement Engineer Podcast. My name is Robert Chinetsky. Joining me, as always, for our weekly banter. He's a little older, he's a little grayer, but he's still just as damn sexy as ever. Mr. Justin Hall of Supplement Snoop. And our special guest this week is Mr. Joey Savage, the formulator and CSO of Glaxon Labs Supplements. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you got this in just before my mid-afternoon nap. Thanks for accommodating my new schedule now that I'm, a year older.
My pleasure, man. I do what I can. So, Joey, thank you for making time out. You've got your lab all set up back there, man. You've had lots of conversations offline with Justin, same with me, and it's about time we got you on the show. So this is gonna be fun.
Well, I'm definitely glad to be here too. It's definitely gonna be fun.
Excellent. So
yeah, I was gonna say if I could just kick it off real quick, I would just like to say we talk a lot about Glaxon on our weekly podcast, Robert, and there's reasons why. Is because when you get to our point, Robert, it's like you hear so much shit all the time from companies, and they'll send you DMs, and you're just like, oh my god, like please stop. And then I know we had talked about this a lot once. The first couple of times I talked to Joey, I was like, okay, this is for sure different. Very smart guy, open with communication, things like that, but also it's like, hey man, let's just talk about this stuff. Like it's not like I'm going to sit up here and tell you guys like this is the way it is because I'm smarter than everybody. So I just appreciate the way that they approach things. And it really has, I think, also carried over into their formulas and their products and the results from there. I think that's why there's like this, a lot of brands are looking around right now going, man, how are they just like crushing the market right now at such a early stage? And when you realize you look behind the curtain, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. It's not a fluke that they're hit the ground running so well.
Absolutely. So, Joey, anytime we've got somebody first time on the podcast, obviously anybody that's watched your Supplement Lab IG stories videos, and if you're not watching that, go check those out because there is a ton of good free quality information that Joey's given out on a very regular basis. But obviously you've got a science background of some type, so walk us through, how you got into the industry. What's your background? How did you hook up with the guys and start Glaxon and start working with them?
Well, as far as my background, I initially graduated high school wanting to get like a degree in finance, and I was gonna go to some school in Florida, and like the first hurricane came through, and I was like, this isn't gonna work, and just the whole concept of, just like it's all about money and everything. It's not very rewarding or anything like that. And, as soon as I think it was like 2004, Hurricane Charlie came through and I left Florida. And on my way back home to Austin, my sister was attending Texas A&M, and I went and visited her over there. And there was just a light bulb that went off in my head at the time. And I'm like, this is an agricultural school. And they do a lot of interesting experiments, and especially like in the realms of like selective breeding and genetics and all kinds of stuff like that, because it's what ends up in your grocery store, And from that, I was like, okay, I'm going to pivot my whole life plan, and I'm going to pursue a degree in genetics and biochemistry. And it was also at this time that I had already worked in a couple of different retail stores selling supplements before, and I was already pretty sharp on this. So I was basically taking what I was already, doing pretty well at selling at, and I was going to apply it to this realm of science. And it's just so rewarding, so much more rewarding than going after some sort of a finance degree, because understanding like the little things inside of us that nobody ever sees is just it's magical to a degree. But I ended up working at a supplement store there locally in College Station that was actually previously owned by the formulator and CEO of Cellucor. And I had cultivated a very, very strong relationship with him, and like what I would say would be like an apprenticeship under him. And there were times where I was starting to make some formulation calls, while I wasn't even working there at the time. And that alone was really cool for me because I was so young, and I had enough insight to be able to put some pieces together and be like, okay, yes, we're going to use this raw material for this kind of thing. And it's going to be different than anybody else has. And that was just step one. And a couple months after that, they actually had discussions with me about bringing me in full time. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I took that leap and I started working for them doing some road sales kind of stuff. And it wasn't much longer after that there was an interesting sequence of events where that formulator and CEO left the company. And I was left with some really, really big shoes to fill. And I just stepped into that role and I said, okay, if there's anyone that is going to do it, I might as well do it.
Right.
And from there, the first product I ever made was decently gray area, but it was super, super good. Super
got any
good.
left?
No. I mean, people at the time were like paying $300 a bottle for that stuff on eBay.
Jesus. Jesus.
It's like, okay, all right, if that's what you want to do, you can probably go get the real thing, for less money, but whatever. But those were definitely long before the Cellucor everybody like knows today. There's quite a gap there. But being a part of that and really just getting that real world experience was something that was way more mind expanding than I ever ran into in school. And there's a lot of different things in this industry that they just don't teach. There's not a degree program for doing this kind of work. You could go to school and you could look at nutrition or training or even just biochemistry and stuff. But you're still not going to be equipped with all the tools that you're really going to need moving into this industry. So I'm really thankful for the years of experience that I got with them. And after I left that company, I started my own company for a little bit called Limited Labs. And I was trying to get on the cutting edge of the exogenous ketone supplementation. Ran an Indiegogo for that. It worked. And basically, we had a manufacturing hiccup that was detrimental in that sense. So, I basically picked up all my pieces from that. I got introduced through a mutual friend to Michael, who's the CEO of this company here. And we had some interesting discussions and he was like, okay, you really, really know what you're talking about. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing this a while. So I think total, I've been doing this since 2007, so I'm on 13 years of being in this role. Even though it may not seem like that, I youngish in my looks and everything, but either way, I've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah.
And so we came here. Michael had this brand called Glaxon that had some previous generations before it, and he's like, I want to completely facelift and redo this thing. And I was like, all right, I can do that. And so we go through all these formulas, and I instead of just really trying to stay true to Glaxon and as far as like the ingredients and formulas that were there previously, I just took the concept, this is for this category and did a reformulation of those kind of products to where I knew that they were a little bit beefier doses than they had previously and a couple different new ingredients. And I was like, okay, and as soon as the TK came on board, which was probably about 2 months, or no, not 2 months, probably about 6 months after I was here, we started doing like all the graphical kind of stuff as far as like the labels and everything. And each of these products like just started to like take on their own identities. And it was really neat because we had agreed from the beginning that even though the packaging should be similar, they should also be almost completely different. And if you like kind of saw them in like two different spots in the store, you really wouldn't know if you'd never seen the brand before that these are actually two products in the same product line. Cool. So to be a little bit different in that kind of sense was something that we wanted to do, and yet still kind of have the streamline with like the little the basic structure of the formula or of the labels and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's a ton of categories that we still want to play with, and there's a lot of different ways that Glaxon in the coming years is going to get to express itself a little bit more. That's a long enough answer.
Yeah, that's perfect. Now I thought Justin was prepping for a follow-up there. That's why I was giving him the floor for something.
Yeah, right. I usually do, right? Yeah. So I think it's kind of interesting. Just one thing I'll point out is, so each one of us, I think at one point we've said, I have completely abandoned my life plan to get into like this.
Yep.
Robert and I talk about this a lot. Robert has an engineering background, and at some point he was like, screw it, I'm out. I had my own sort of plan, and at some point I was like, screw it, I'm out. And I think it's kind of funny that that all three of us have that in common. It's kind of an interesting characteristic. There's a lot of questions though that I know I had in my head, but I think you crushed so many topics right there. I think like the first thing I wanted to hit on, and probably because I talked to Michael a lot from over there.
Mm-hmm.
So being a formulator, there's things that you want to do, but then it has to make sense, right, for the brand itself too. Like how difficult.
Don't get me wrong, folks. I would love to make ridiculously expensive products that do amazing shit, but you gotta bring it down to earth and keep it real, because this is capitalism,
right? And I think that that's important too. That you find. I think what I've noticed, just being on the outside, sort of looking in at the industry, there's a lot of people that sort of, you bounce around a little bit until you find that home where things just sort of make sense. Sometimes you're sort of like taking a job because you need to work, or you're apprenticing for someone or something like that. And it seems like you have found that sort of balance where you're like, okay, I'm on a team that'll allow me to sort of stretch my legs a little bit while also realizing you're not like running the entire show. And you also, so there's a balance there. So I'm just kind of curious how that works out. Like if it's, because it's kind of a small team over there, right? And you guys just all have to get together and sort of, there's that, the dynamic of the team environment.
Because I've been amongst, not so good teams, and I've been a part of, I find this team to be an exceptionally great team. First, because for the most part, everybody gets along and we're all along the same train of thought. And I'm not close-minded enough to where if I've got like an ingredient suggestion that comes from someone else, and I'll be like, you know what, maybe you're right. That kind of does make sense. And that sometimes you do see like some WTF kind of combinations in some of these products, and you're like, okay, what was that? Like what was the point behind that? And I think that's why the necessity of the supplement lab videos is like come about, because you not very often are you going to find that perspective from someone who is intimately involved with the creation of a product, and like, well, here's why this happened and why this happened, and here's what we're trying to go for here.
Well, I think that that's one thing that the ingredient synergy has always been kind of a thing, right? But we also know consumers are sort of like, wait a minute, a lot of companies use ingredient synergy as a way to use less, and so now when you have someone that's actually like, okay, we use ingredients together for a reason, and here's why. That's pretty cool to me, because I'm like, there's lots of things where I'm watching your videos and I'm like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Because you're like, unless someone really shows you, like what you said, there's not like a course to take for this. Like, yeah, there's certain things that sort of carry over, but once you sort of really get into this, there's a lot of people that I know that have really deep like science backgrounds that still don't know anything about supplements and how they work and stuff like that too. So I think it's pretty cool what you do.
Yeah. Walk us through your thought process when you're just sitting down to design a formula, Joey. So, how much are you delving into the studies? How are you extracting the doses that you're using of the ingredients? How much do you actually buy into that whole ingredient synergy? Is it to the extent where you can get by with like 1.5 grams of citrulline if you put in, 750 milligrams of agmatine, or do you still need to hit bottom thresholds in order to consider an ingredient being effective in a formula?
It's a really interesting give and take, because if there are times where if you underdose something, you're going to get burned at the stake, no matter what you do.
Right.
Because it's just the mentality that we have. And there have been like a couple of brands and product lines that have really pushed that, clinical dosages or GTFO kind of mentality, which doesn't necessarily always pan out. You got these couple different companies in like 10 grams of citrulline, and you're just like, might be hitting your head on the ceiling right there. Yeah. Because it does not go much higher, and nitric oxide doesn't really increase like all that significantly between 6 grams of malate, where you're actually looking at about 3 grams of actual citrulline, versus these 10 grams of actual citrulline kind of products. You're kind of throwing money at something that is just not, you're not going to get the payoff from. But when it comes to actual synergies, which I use that word sparingly because I know some people take it very, very seriously. If there's a synergy, I will say the word synergy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened twice so far. One in the Slice video that was out last week, and there's going to be another one that will be discussed in Thermal, which I think goes either live later today or tomorrow.
Yeah, I just pulled that up on the site. It's live now.
Oh, I did not know that. Well,
yeah.
For those of you who haven't seen it, go check out Supplement Lab on YouTube or Instagram TV, and check out the video for Thermal.
I like how cool product, man.
Perfectly. It's different, it's I like the small scoop, small powder, non-stim kind of fat burner type products. For the most part, they're carnitine, and there's carnitine in Thermal too. But when this category popped up, I want to say it was maybe 2014, 2015. And, these kinds of products started showing up. They were nice little additive kind of things. Usually they're at about a $20 price point. So they were like a no-brainer for most people to pick them up. Granted, the Thermal's like $60 at full price. But you're not going to find Beba in any of those other $20 products.
Right.
Because this ingredient's expensive. And, of course, I get to play with luxurious dosages. I've done between like 2 and 3 grams before. And, it's just, that would be like, probably $150 product if you had like 2 grams at like 30 servings kind of thing. Yeah. So, you've got to realize what you can do and what you kind of can't do. 500 milligram dose in this is like the minimum to have any kind of expectations out of Beba supplementation. Mm-hmm. So they do have a range where they offer, you can do the 500 to, roughly 2 gram kind of range. But, it's comes down to your economic feasibility of like everything else that's in the formula. And I think, I'm pretty excited about this one. I've been personally, because we made some here in house, I've been stacking with Slice, and the sweat, let me tell you, is remarkable. Like, I'll be doing a downward dog in yoga, and there's like a small little river that goes down my spine and off the top of my head. And I'm just like, holy cow, I did not know that a human being could do this.
So I have a question about, so when it comes to using, say, like a new ingredient or something like that, the tough part seems to me is like, okay, people are like, I want innovation, I want new stuff. But then it's like, okay, that's one thing. So, hey, let's give you something new. But then you also have to sort of spend the time and the money and the resources to actually educate people at the same time. Because then people a lot of times are like, well, this is new. Is this BS? Like, I don't get it kind of thing. So it's like, I see a lot of this from consumers who are like, we want innovation. And then you give them something innovative and they're like, well, I don't believe you. It's kind of like, well, it's like, so is that like, when you're trying to come up with something, is that sort of part of your thought process? Like, okay, how much are we going to have to walk people into this answer?
I probably had a more difficult time with that previously with other companies, but because I have the outlet of Supplement Lab, it does a couple of different things. For one, it helps educate the consumer on what the heck's actually going on. But there's also an interesting trickle down because it also teaches store owners and it teaches their employees and their managers. And, if they've got a reference, that's in video format, so it's not entirely boring, where they all in that chain can learn about what's going on. And previously, like, because Instagram wasn't really much of a thing like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, the whole concept of being able to like teach your consumers and your retail partners and everybody else in that chain has become a lot easier. There were times where I would go to like GNC meetups or whatever it is, and there's like a room full of 100 people that are like, store managers and district managers and regional managers. And I would, no shit, do like a 3-hour long presentation going over 6 products and going over all the different mechanisms of action. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, all right, y'all take some caffeine because you're going to have to buckle in because this is not going to be easy for you. But, at the same time, they got the point that we knew what we were talking about. And another thing that we did back then is we actually had like some 3D medical animations that were like narrated from Master Chief from Halo, and there was like this whole concept where you would just follow the molecule from ingestion to its actual mechanism.
Cool.
So there's a lot of different ways that education has been important to me and throughout my career, because you're if you want to do innovative stuff, that gap will always be there, and you've got to cater to not just like your 5 to 10% of the consumers that are like hardcore PubMed, burn you at the stake kind of people, but you've also got to translate that message to normal everyday people as well in order to get them to understand it, which that's probably the most challenging part of the educational aspect, is how do I take this invisible world and these ingredients that hardly anyone knows about unless you are one of those PubMed sharks, and then take this information and not only you're looking at cell studies and you're looking at model system studies with rodents and rats and dogs and God knows what else, and then your actual human clinical studies, but usually those human clinical studies are involving a much more extreme kind of scenario. If you're looking for something that causes like vasodilation and gives you good pumps because of nitric oxide, the best place for you to look for is studies that have been involving natural products in like hypertensive patients, people that have a serious medical issue, and they're using these things to try to see how much of a dent they can put into those symptoms. So you've got to take that information and try to line up this story of not just, here's how it works in a cell, in a rat, in a human, and a normal human in addition to that. But you've got to look at it almost in a chronological kind of sense. So there's research that has been done for almost a century. If you try really hard, you can go back and find some stuff from like the early 1900s and 1800s and stuff. And their comprehension of science is nothing like what it is today. But to see where this guy over here was running a study in like the 1930s or something, maybe it was like a military study or something, and then to see how that has been like extrapolated on throughout the decades, and where they learned more and where they learned a little bit more and they learned a little bit more, and now they've got this more comprehensive picture as far as what's really going on, in our modern day. You look at stuff from like the 1990s even versus like a 2018 2019 study. It's like night and day, the different methods and the different type of stuff that they use, and the technology.
I think one thing that you just said right there, I think is critical with where we're at in the supplement industry, and what I try to talk about and what Robert tries to talk about, is there are some companies and things that will treat, say, a new product or a new ingredient as this is the end of scientific discovery. We have it. Here's the answer. Now everyone come buy it. Where you guys have the approach of, this might be a jumping off point. Like we're gonna bring you something, and we don't know if this is the answer. We feel really good about where we're going. Now we need to get this out there, and we need people's feedback, and we need to talk about this, because this could lead to really, really cool things. Like what you said, there's this progression, this extrapolation, and I think that's what's really cool is people have bought into this process. What you're doing, they don't necessarily have to understand every word you're saying during your videos, but they're like, hey, this is cool. I appreciate the willingness of you guys to sort of walk us through it, because we know this, hopefully this is just the beginning, rather than, some companies promoting this as, here it is, here's the answer to all your problems kind of thing. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I like taking them more of like a conservative kind of approach, where we're not going to be like, this is the end all be all kind of thing, and I like to use the example of MyoSeq, because, I've got further plans for MyoSeq, and this is the best we've got for right now. It's based off of this completely new concept, and it is going to be subject to change because it will undergo gradual improvements over time. And I think that needs to be something that, if you're a company that's just more in this than making a buck, then, you're going to have to take that kind of approach, and you're going to have to gradually make these kind of improvements in your formulas along the way, the further you progress. And, and in a best case scenario, you're not cutting costs, you're improving efficacy, while your scaling is going to be the part that actually cuts those costs. So you're to be able to sequentially deliver better products over time is definitely a goal that we have. And, there will be changes to formulas in the future because we're going to find out new things and new methods and new ways to make them better and ways that, even though we don't even know yet. So that's the fun in this job.
Well, along the line, since you brought up MyoSeq, two things. First off, I'm sipping a scoop of that mixed with the super greens right now, it's an interesting flavor combination to say the least. But also, I know you've touched on this in the video you did for Xeno and MyoSeq. First off, it's a prop blend, which people have their feelings one way or the other about prop blends. Walk us through how you came up with the actual 7-gram blend that's in MyoSeq. And then not defend why you that, but choose why y'all and maybe you can explain why y'all went with a prop blend in that instance instead of just listing out in individual amounts of every amino. Because if you look at most EAA formulas, they're all the exact same within a 50 milligram dose of one another. So walk us through why there's so many different aminos in there and all of that.
All right. Step one was I was looking at different EAA kind of blends and stuff, and in the research behind EAAs, and I get, why they're essential. They're needed for protein synthesis. They're going to be usually the rate limiting factors in how well you're going to repair. And I was like, okay, so instead of just focusing on these rate limiting factors, there's obviously much more to the picture going on here. And, and it's frustrating because you're like, okay, you got these 9 amino acids, you got these dosages because these dosages were studied, but they're hardly fine tuned. Our comprehension of the new EAA paradigm versus the old BCAA paradigm, is confusing to the consumer. But at the same time, we do know that EAAs are better than BCAAs, and we firmly established that at this point. Yeah. And then the other thing is the other question I get about this is, well, why don't you just consume protein? And to my answer to that is, well, why don't you? because it does seem a little bit silly that this supplemental amino acids category exists if that's really the mindset you have. And, if you don't want to buy amino acids, then don't buy amino acids. It's right. One of those kind of things.
Imagine that.
But if you do, then you want to have a ratio set of amino acids that actually, makes logical sense. And, I looked at this from like a supply and demand kind of standpoint. Okay. We're not trying to grow fat cells and we're not trying to grow bone cells or anything like that. We're trying to grow muscle cells, and muscle cells for the most part are composed of these major structural components that, hold the plasma membrane up, and they actually flex the sarcomere and everything. And to narrow that down, but I will say this, the collagen that's in there was actually something that I was going to actually sequence and stuff. And I actually looked at the actual peptide sequence of collagen, and I was like, I'm going to be at my desk for days doing this. Because it's a really, really, really long peptide chain, especially in comparison to the other major structural components of skeletal muscle. So, I looked at 3 predominant peptides that were there in a ratio to other 2 major stabilizing peptides that essentially hold those things up. Yeah. And it was completely on a structural basis. It's just saying, if we want to build the tissue back together, we have to focus on the things that are the main issues, and not so much like the enzymatic interactions that are going on in the cell. Those aren't particularly what we're concerned with at this point. We're concerned with just the structural meat and potatoes, to throw a pun in there, of the actual muscle growth itself. So by focusing on that, and me doing a couple of days of math with a really, really big Excel spreadsheet,
I don't blame you.
Well, it wasn't planned. Like this thing about Xeno MyoSeq initially was not planned. We were just going to go regular EAAs, and I'm like, just secretly on my own, I'm like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure this out, and I'm gonna figure out something that makes sense. And I'm just gonna throw it on the shelf and see if the need arises. And sure enough, we had this EAA product, and we're like, all right, well, are we just gonna do EAAs and just be like another product in that category, or are we gonna try to do something? And I was like, well, Michael, I'm so glad you asked. I've got this thing here I've been working on, and he's like, okay, this actually does make sense. And it is a little bit more expensive per kilo than like regular EAAs because it's custom. You know, we have to get it custom blended and everything and buy it by the ton and have it sent over here. And, you know, and then we just work off of that. But, you know, so far it's been pretty good. My only complaint is the lysine hydrochloride is kind of granular, and I want to uniform the particle size in the next round. If you're wondering what the little weird chunky things are at the bottom of the Xeno, that's what it is. It's just your lysine. But I usually throw my protein in the same shaker after I'm done doing the aminos, and that way I get my extra lysine there at the bottom. But you know, it's whatever thing. This is a version 1. It's something that, you know, we do intend on improving as time goes by, because we are going to start adding in more of those other kind of components that I omitted from this first round. So there will be like a 2.0 and a 3.0 as it goes on further.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that was something that I thought was really cool. Robert and I have talked about this a lot in the past. I just remember first sort of getting into all this stuff, and people right away, all they wanted to ask me about was like amino acids. And I'm like, well, I don't really know. I was like, doesn't it make sense to me? Like the first thing that came to my head is I was looking at like your typical amino acid profile from a quality whey protein. I was like, wouldn't that like be a good place to start? I don't know, like to try to match, like get close to those ratios. And when I heard about what you guys were doing, I think I remember asking you, I was like, so how does the collagen play into it? And you were kind of like, this sort of one thing at a time kind of thing. And I was like, I totally get it, because we had talked about some other people I know, and I like adding collagen to, say, your intra workout, because you're getting, yes, you have these 9 amino acids, but what about the other ones and the other ratios that you get and how it sort of all works together. So I think it's a super cool. If ever I would, I mean, I'm not against prop blends in any way, shape, or form, but if ever I would totally condone one, it would be in a position like this. I'm all for it here.
Well, and this is the situation where it does make sense, and I even if we were to display the ratios, that would alone would beget so many questions like, what the hell? Like, why are you doing this and this and this?
Yeah.
And it's like there's a bigger picture going on. The other thing I like about Xeno is I wanted to have some sort of like EAA kind of thing with joint support, because usually, those dosages, whether it's collagen or even if you're throwing glucosamine chondroitin or something in there, they're big dosages. And to be quite honest, they more rightly belong in a powder type formulation than they do on like a tablet, because I hate tablets, and I don't know, some people don't hate tablets, but they're just the least fun form of solid dose that you could ever take. But I've seen a couple of formulas that like I'm not going to drop the company name, but they had a multivitamin that was a powder form that had glucosamine and chondroitin and all that other kind of stuff in it. And I'm like, hey, that's really cool. It's a powder form and you drink all this stuff instead of having to take huge capsules, but does it really belong in a multivitamin? And, that's something where I was just like, I know where it should belong. Where it should belong is in the one place where you're trying to, do an attempt at inducing some repair. And there's definitely more than just muscles that get affected by a strenuous workout.
Well put.
So you got to take care of that tissue too.
Yeah. Let's transition now to the hybrid, which is the nootropic keto carbs. So, and Justin and I have talked about that a few times on the podcast. Walk us through that one, because I know you said you were one of the first companies when you had limited labs to do some of the BHB salts. And as far as exercise performance, we haven't seen a ton of positive things about BHB salts in regards to them actually boosting performance, whether you're fat adapted or transitioning in the process of transitioning from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. So, walk us through that and see, why go with the exogenous ketones in this, why the ratio of carbohydrates that you did and all of that stuff.
For one, it's our number one expensive product, and it was made out of necessity for some internal needs that we had here. A lot of the guys here are really interested in intermittent fasting, and if you want to try to facilitate that and keep that going a little bit better, that to take something like exogenous ketones, or even if you mix little carbs in there, then that's actually kind of interesting as far as keeping your satiety down and keeping your ATP levels high while you're trying to do some sort of fasting, even though it kind of breaks the fast. So like if you're within a couple hours before you're about to have your caloric intake window, that it's something that could really just help bridge that kind of gap. Now, as far as performance and all that is concerned, a lot of the earlier studies that were like in vitro studies, or even Richard Veitch's, he had a heart that was getting perfused and pumping blood through it. And I think it was like a rodent study where he was playing with exogenous BHB, but he was also doing a hyperinsulinemic kind of response. So he was seeing the way that these ketones would function under the influence of high insulin levels. And he speculated in that study that not just BHB alone, but the combination of BHB and carbs would actually be a more compelling type of a super fuel, as he called it, than just either one of those things alone. So hybrid is a first attempt at trying to bring that conversation to light. There's a lot that's not known about that because it's so divided in your keto world and then your non-keto world that no one's really like saying, why don't we just do both? Let's put them both together.
Yeah.
And then, you talk about some bang for your buck because the heart and the brain and the muscles will eat up, those ketones preferentially. And then you've got carbs that are going on too, which that can end up creating that higher insulin response, and those actual ketones will end up doing more work. So there's a potential here to actually create more ATP than with either one of these things alone. And I just wanted to put a product out there that kind of like went in the face of both keto and the non-keto, those dogmas, and say, you guys are both missing the point. Because
I respect that.
If you had like something like a Gatorade that actually had ketones in it as well, Gatorade, if you're watching, you should do this. To put them both in the same kind of thing, because you could potentially get better results. Those guys will study it. I know they'll study it. They run studies all the time. And, they got their beautiful sugary, salty water. And if they just had a little bit of BHB salts in there as well, it'd be really kind of interesting to find out how that actually performs. So I'm not going to defend, the ketones, their performance effects are kind of questionable because really, all this stuff is getting eaten up really, really quickly. So it's, your brain might burn through half your ketones before your muscles ever get a shot at taking it. Or if you've taken caffeine and your heart is going a little bit faster, your heart's going to eat up those ketones faster than your muscles will. But to have both at the same time, that's kind of interesting. I'm kind of going off rails as far as my tangent, but the idea is instead of being completely on one side or the other with hybrid, that we actually brought them both together, and it's something that's going to open this conversation up is the goal, and that's how a lot of these things work. As we're going to push things out there, and people are either going to play with them or they're not going to play with them. But we're trying to open these conversations up to be like, well, maybe not one or the other is the answer, but the combination of the two might be actually more compelling. And even with things like flight, we're pushing these things out there to get these conversations going, because there's going to be other companies that'll they'll try to copy it, but I don't really necessarily see that as a particularly bad thing, because we're all going to be eventually working toward this same goal of really finding out what's best, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with that, because in the instances I've used BHB salts, and I've mentioned this to Justin several times, is that I get a neural charging effect. So I get that, and it speaks to the point that you said that your brain is probably going to take those up first before it gets to your muscles. So maybe that's why we're not seeing any significant improvements as far as the exercise studies go. But there is definitely a neural charging or a switching on to the brain that's different in a way than caffeine does. So I'm curious why there haven't been more studies in that way, just in normal healthy individuals. I know they use them for other things with people with cognitive decline or energy metabolism problems and things like that. But I want to see how it works as far as improving cognitive measures that way, and not after an exhausting exercise test, because that's one of the instances they've done, is that they had people hop on a sprint bike and do wind gates for, I don't know, 4 or 6 rounds, and then they made them do a bunch of cognitive battery tests. And I'm thinking, all right, well, use it in an actual study setting when somebody's, just trying to learn something for a final or do more work or, match numbers on a board or something like that. I think that would be cool. So I'm curious to try this one out and see how that actually works. Do you have a recommended dosing that you do? I know you mentioned the intermittent fasting protocol, but do you use it in a different circumstance in your day-to-day life, or how do you typically recommend it to people?
I mix it with thermal and slice or thermal slice and plasma surge before I go work out, which, is very not typical. It's who's going to buy this nitric oxide boosting keto carb plus Babo and a fat burner
I
all
will.
at the same time. Well, it is kind of interesting because you're working on all these different thermogenic kind of pathways, but at the same time, you're working on increasing blood flow and how does this all kind of pair together kind of thing. And the way I look at it is I'm moving fats around more efficiently. If I'm working out and doing all the stuff that I'm supposed to, and to have hybrid, because I don't like taking caffeine in the evenings. I originally made Ketone IO because I like these $2 300 milligram drinks, but I don't like drinking like 4 of them a day.
Right.
I don't, and I wanted something that was going to keep me at cruising altitude, because once you achieve it, maintaining it is the hard part, and I feel like that's where like hybrid kind of like comes into it. And when you got a job where you're working 8 hours a day kind of thing, and you have your 2 o'clock kind of slump, and if you don't want to have caffeine at that point in time, there need to be like some non-stimulatory kind of options that don't kill your buzz, so to speak.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I was gonna say I use it post workout, and usually the way I go, because I work out fasted, and what I started tinkering around with it is if I take a pre-workout and I go have my workout, I like to get some carbs in there too. And what I've noticed, exactly like what you're saying, if I take a post workout, that I don't have that roller coaster that goes on. I talk about that all the time on our podcast. I was like, my goal was always, because you got shit to do, after a workout, you got work to do. And it's like, I can't be having that up and down and then looking for another stimulant and stuff like that. So once I started using that hybrid post workout, exactly like what you said, like you get up and it just maintains that nice level, especially, we were talking about like the neurological sort of effects. So that's what I've been using it there, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also the glycogen sparing effect of doing it in that post-workout kind of scenario too. Yep. Because if you have that extra source of ATP, then you can actually use the actual carbs that are in there to actually help replenish that a little bit more efficiently.
How did you decide on the exact amount of carbs to BHB salts that were in there? I mean, I know price always factors into it, and BHB certainly aren't a cheap form of carbohydrate, neither is D-ribose or cluster dextrin. But how, was there something that you saw maybe in the research or in your own personal experimentation for why you kind of went with almost like a 2-to-1 ratio of carbs to ketones?
A lot of it was financially driven, but it's one of those things where we did want to break the mold, and we wanted to do it without killing us in the process. So we did go with a carbohydrate blend, because not just because of financial reasons on that, but because you have 3 different carbs that have 3 completely different personalities. You've got ribose in there that, aside from being an energy substrate, does a whole lot of different things as far as its ability to help catalyze reactions, work with NAD to form the different versions of that. But it's also something that's super essential to the entire body and every kind of cell that you have. The cluster dextrin is mostly because who doesn't like that stuff? Yep. Who doesn't like being a little fancy with something that's going to facilitate gastric emptying and be multi-branched carbohydrate kind of thing that's actually kind of cool in its structure. And then malto, that's obviously something that's padding the financial blow, but at the same time it's a complex polysaccharide as well. So you do get that quick stuff with the ribose, but then you get that further kind of feed with the malto and the HBCD as well. And then the ketones, there's a lot of different ways you can slice ketones, and they're notoriously not profitable products. I have experience with that in the past. It's really difficult to get to the dosages that you really need of the actual BHB, and then not have some sort of effect on the actual salt load and the GI stress that you would end up getting from doing that.
Right. Because
if you take a solid 12-gram dose or a 14-gram dose of BHB salts, what else you're getting is a lot of diarrhea. Unavoidable, because there's so much calcium and sodium and magnesium that you're going to take in all at once. And in some cases, you'd probably be hitting close to 100% RDA on your magnesium in one shot. And that's going to loosen the bowels pretty quickly. And, we didn't want that. There are times where I do take it, and it does happen even still. But and there's also phosphorus salts in there, so we did that, and with the creatine and all that kind of stuff. And anytime you see like creatine and ribose and phosphorus together, it's going to be a good time as far as that's concerned. But the salt load was definitely a concern also, aside from price. But we've got a couple pivots in mind where we can actually make that lower dose more efficacious and also decrease the salt load, and that's TBD and hybrid version 2.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say, do you see messing around, tinkering with the nootropic element of the actual nootropic blend that y'all have in there, the energetic flow state blend, as y'all call it, where do you want it to be synergistic with Adrenal, or do you want it to be a standalone?
It could be, I wouldn't say synergistic, but it could definitely help support
stackable,
Adrenal.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, there's definite, stackability, but, as far as elaborating on that, I'd really like to personally see hybrid kind of retooled for its intended purpose of being that mixture of carbohydrates and ketones, and maybe kind of losing some of that other stuff. But, and if we were to do that, that would essentially create some room for some sort of standalone creatine super watery thing over here. And if hybrid were to undergo this mitosis and be more efficacious at its original job, while we started take care of these other things that are kind of like, okay, well, I see your creatine magna power, it's not in there at a huge dose, so it's kind of yawn at the creatine magna power that's in there. But to be able to split those and then have a more solid identity of a creatine type product over here, and then this keto carb over here, I think that's probably where we're going to see that go.
Cool. Yeah. So we got to talk about flight. So I know like my discount code has been bringing in the money for me big time, because so I know when you guys talk about that product, and so we opened up the floor on the private Facebook group that we have to ask some questions. And now, so the first question that came up was from my wife, so I have to ask, but it can also sort of take part in this whole conversation of this product. She asked, because she's mad because I love it so much. And I was like, I don't know that you using it would be necessarily a good idea. I'm not really sure there. So she asked, she was like, well, how about a female version of flight? Like, is that on the way? But also just talking about flight in general, because, when I started using it, I was seriously the most skeptical person probably to ever let use that product, because I've heard the colostrum thing, lots of times, the bioactive peptides, and it's an amazing concept. I love the concept, but it just hasn't carried over. And then I started using flight, and I was like, this thing works. It freaking works. And then a lot of people, based on that, have picked it up and have been giving me really good feedback on it. So that is just a really cool, I think, achievement. People really seem to like it, and just kind of curious as, what you can talk about there, and then maybe we can talk about with the future and when women are involved and stuff like that.
So as soon as flight came out, I had difficulty, because I was like, okay, this does have bovine orchic extract in there, and that's something that can be limiting in your customer base. But at the same time, those people that are your hardcore workout dudes, they would see that and be like, all right, put some balls in there, whatever. That could definitely help, because I talked about this in the video, like in those like 1800 1900 type studies, when they're figuring out like what insulin was and all these different thyroid hormones, that these organ extracts were usually like standard of care back in those times, because they didn't have synthetic drugs. So as far as what flight does, I don't think particularly like the orchic is necessarily the showstopper in that product. I could definitely see it undergoing some sort of changes that would make that more unisex, because I didn't expect flight to be as cool as it is, not at all. We ended up making this product, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take some of these concepts that I've been kind of holding on to, I'm going to put them together, and just trying to make something that's compliant and legal, but would hopefully deliver. And when we actually ended up with the product and everybody started taking it and we sent it out for reviews and everything, it did stuff that I don't think any of us anticipated. And that's really what's kind of interesting about it, because, you know, like for the most part, you take something like this and you're looking for like kind of muscle gains. But that's not exactly what happened. You know, what happened was like, I would say most particularly, I feel it in the connective tissue. I feel it where my muscles, you know, come into contact with the cartilage and then they attach to the bone. And, you know, it's a different kind of strength than you would really feel with any other kind of product, you know, that's, you know, hormonal or not in that category. Because I don't think that necessarily the goal is muscle growth with flight, but I think it is that more sort of repair and regeneration. And it works in this kind of way that is not directly influencing protein synthesis, but it's working on like all these other interesting little things that kind of like assist and fall outside the realm of actual protein synthesis. So, you know, it's interesting. And, you know, the whole concept of trying to like liberate your stem cells, even though it's super controversial, like I said in the video, it's not that hard, and even exercise alone does it. So, you know, you're already doing it. It's just a matter of like trying to pour gas on that fire in order to make, you know, more flames. So is there going to be a women friendly version of flight? Maybe. I think it would be worth doing, because, you know, I don't really want to alienate people that would enjoy taking the product. There are some people out there that, you know, just completely disregard the orchic extract in there, and they're just like, oh, this ain't going to do anything, and it's not that big a deal. You know, but I'm thinking on the end of the consumer, of the lady who's being told to take this in a store, and she's like kind of on the fence, and she doesn't know if she would like to do it, and God forbid she had any kind of side effects kind of thing. You know, if from a much more conservative standpoint, you know, if the female consumer is educated and she's looking at this and she's like, oh, there's bull balls in here, I don't know, you know. So like, I think from that aspect, you know, that she doesn't want to end up waking up like, you know, 3 weeks into her flight cycle and start growing hair on her knuckles. I wouldn't feel too cool about that. However, you know, you look at some of the other stuff that's in there, as far as effects that may happen on a woman that may be unique to them that would not be found in men, would just be an overall increase in fertility. But that's just it can be a good or a bad thing. Depends on what you want to do with your life.
Yeah, never mind. I don't want her taking that then. But so it was kind of funny, because when I first started taking it, people were really intrigued. They're like, Justin, what do you think? So I probably spent 20 minutes worth of videos, and I'm telling you, I don't know that I actually said a damn thing like in those videos, because I'm trying to explain to someone that's never used it. I was like, when I'm working out, there's a different level of, say, pump, or a different level of feeling that you feel. I was like, honestly, and this sounds so bizarre to say it, I was like, but I feel more connectivity between my muscles as I'm working out. I was like, I can feel the movements deeper. And then ultimately it slowly started, I noticed like a gradual, you know, not massive like muscle gain, but sort of, it's almost like, I still can't really explain it like perfectly, but it seems like that's like what other people have been experiencing too. And I'm like, that's what I was trying to say. Is like, you nailed it.
From my perspective, because, you know, this is anecdotal, so I'll throw that out as a disclaimer. It feels like you get a better quality of muscle growth, because it feels like it is reaching those deeper areas that you may not be activating when you're normally working out. I've watched some of, you know, our affiliates and athletes and stuff, and I can see them when they're working out, and I'll send them a message or something if it's like in their story, and I'll be like, that right there, it's that moment right there that flight is working, because the way you're using your muscles is not the typical explosivity. You could have more time under tension. You could have a whole lot more focus in your actual reps, because you're becoming more connected with these deeper parts of the muscles that you're just not as consciously aware of otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
It's a weird feeling.
It's
a
totally
weird feeling.
I'm telling you, so I used it for right away. We noticed we had a joke sort of on our private group because immediately I'm like, okay, I wake up like within the first week. I'm like, I wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and it's a challenge because you're just, like the blood flow is obvious like throughout the night. I would always take it at night before I go to bed, and then as we're going along, I'm like, okay, I feel good. I was like, there's nothing crazy going on here. But then I swear to God, it was like one day at the gym, I'm like, what the hell is this that I'm feeling? I was like, I'm feeling like totally, and I'm like, okay, maybe you just had like a good day. And as we kept going on and on, I could feel it more. The mind muscle connection was something that I had never experienced before. And I'm like, this is freaking cool. And that's when I went out there and I was like, I told everybody, I was like, this is badass. And then other people, when it became available, people jumped all over it. And now a lot of people I know are about 3-4 weeks into it. And they're like, yes, like we know exactly what you're talking about.
It's particularly hard to explain. And I had this challenge like early on with like nootropics and stuff, because there's a lot of nootropics you're not really going to feel acutely.
Right.
And I like to use the term, you don't know it's got you until it's got you. And once you have that moment, you're like, oh fuck, like this is what's been going on the whole time. Yep. And I'm just like, it's like, it's not like you avoid it or anything or really deny that there's something happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, but you just don't expect it to creep up on you like that.
Yeah, I was like, I can't I can't deny this. Like, as skeptical as I was like, this is happening. I was like, so, but it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one formula in particular that's kind of like your shining star, the one you're most proud of, Joey?
Like, I mean, I guess you could say C4, but that thing is grown into a monster now, right? So there's that, and there's several awards that C4 has gotten throughout the years. I got an award for at Supply Side West for innovation in food and beverage the year I dropped Ketone IO, even though that one's like extinct now. I'm really looking forward to like future things. There's a lot of different projects I'm working on, even like outside of Glaxon. There's this Glaxon thing, which that's where I guess a lot of my identity is kind of like tied to.
Yeah.
But there's other brands that we're working on internally as far as like how I would put my spin on this or that. Mm-hmm. And then there's even bigger research projects that are even going on where I'm trying to cultivate some research on bringing a new ingredient to market. And there's probably about 2 or 3 of those that should be on the market, and for some reason they're not. And I'm just like, okay, if I got to find the right people to work with this and actually work on an NDI application and everything, then I'm willing to do that, so long as I do the research on the front end and find out, okay, is this really worth bringing to market, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's where stuff gets interesting. I mean, like, Justin's in on a little bit of this kind of stuff where we're going to look at like blood samples and stuff to find out really quickly, because it's already a generally recognized as safe kind of substance. Is this thing moving the needle on plasma levels of X and Y? And if we can get that, then we have something. And then that's going to be something that's pretty telling. And then the other things are, when you're looking at this ingredient, you're like, how am I going to make this better? Here's what I have, here's what I want, and what does this road look like in between, and how do I improve this to get to the most optimal level? And a lot of times, with several ingredients, you're not going to get here because this is what's commercially available. These guys might be unwilling to change any of their methodologies or manufacturing processes or what have you, and they're just unwilling to move. Now, there's a possibility of the project I'm working on that we may have to settle. But then there's another possibility that we may not. And if we don't, that's going to be cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
I was going to say, like, one thing what I wanted to talk to you about was something you hit on. It seems to me like I talk to a lot of supplement companies. It's very easy to start a supplement company. You can get rolling pretty quickly. One thing that I've noticed about you guys is it seems like you have done a lot of front end work. a lot of investment, a lot of time, a lot of thought process, and then there was sort of like this unveiling, like here's all the work we've been doing, but there was a lot that went into it. It seems like there's a lot of experience on your team. There's a lot of resources that they were willing to invest, like within some ideas that you had and things like that. And I think
Totally.
that's why, like, I just see people, they're just like floored by your early success. And we have these conversations all the time. It's like, this is not a fluke. Like, this is through a lot of hard work up front that no one knew about until the launch happened. And then all of a sudden people are like, holy shit, like they really thought about this, sort of going in. But one thing we get a lot about is people are surprised, is like, how people started taking specimen, myself included. I was like, holy shit, like that like surprised me. Some of the fat burners seem to perform even better. Do you think that has something to do with the quality of resources, the amount of investment you guys make into using, say, quality ingredients? If you could talk about, I don't know, testing methods or whatever you can divulge there. How much do you think that investing into that part of it plays out into your formulas? Because I think a lot of people are surprised, are like, holy shit, like this stuff is better than I anticipated.
Not gonna lie, there's a lot of very small, tiny tweaks that if you don't know what's going on when you're looking at that label, that you'll completely miss. And there's a lot of different properties of a solution inside of a cup that you can play with in order to make whatever's in that cup have more gas mileage, so to speak. And that was one of the things that was like early on, that we were like, okay, this is a quasi absorption enhancing kind of effect that we can elicit from the simplest of things. If you don't know, you don't know, and if you do know, then then you should use it. That kind of thing. And as far as that outperforming what's on the label, there's that one thing in all the powder products that I just mentioned, and then with the capsules, having a discernible difference between a DR capsule and a gelatin capsule, and what that means is a night and day difference maker. Because if you have the ability to drop that load in the small intestine versus the stomach, then you can get a whole spectrum of effects that you're just going to completely miss if you just drop it straight in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
But we have different capsule types for different products because we're aware of that. We will want our fat burner to explode in the stomach because a lot of the receptors that we're targeting are actually in the GI. And then the other thing is, you don't want to wait all day for your fat burner to kick in. That's for sure. I mean, fat burners are something that you're expecting within minutes, so you can go to the gym and do your thing. And in that sense, capsules are kind of convenient. But, some people, with flight, especially before bed, that kind of makes sense. It is a little bit inconvenient with cheap because you do have to take that thing like an hour before. But then some of the things where it doesn't necessarily matter on the timing, like flight or alpha, it's something where you're just going to get better absorption, and it almost doesn't matter what time of day you end up taking this stuff, because as long as you're consistent throughout the bottle at the same time of day kind of thing, then you can still get those better effects. The other DR cap thing we have is plasma caps, which I do find that one to be a little bit inconvenient as far as the 1 hour long gastric transit time. Mm-hmm. But the cool thing about plasma caps, it's not necessarily something that you would necessarily want to have acutely, because aside from the hour gastric transit time, there's also another duration of time where you actually, I'm going to talk about this next week in the video, but there's more stuff that goes on, because like the nitrates, once they're in your gut, they're fully absorbed, but then all that nitrate gets sent to your salivary glands, and you actually have to swallow it a second time once the bacteria in your mouth converted to nitrite. So you're looking at like a 2 hour tempering of expectations on your nitric oxide levels to increase. So, but I've heard a lot of people like plasma caps. I like plasma caps because it definitely does what it's supposed to do if you're patient, and that's why we kind of like advertise that as like a 24-hour pump, because you might want to take it, like mid-morning or mid-afternoon, or maybe you're about to get down with the wife or something. And, as long as you have an idea of that timeline, it's something that does increase nitric oxide levels for a substantially longer amount of time. I think like the half hour on nitrates alone is like 6 hours. Mm-hmm. So, going to work for a while. And, as far as, if you're sleeping a third of your life for about 8 hours a day and you end up, splitting your plasma caps dose, you've got these 2 6-hour segments where you can have higher nitric oxide levels, whether you're working out or whether you're not working out. As far as that kind of thing, there's all kinds of fun little tweaks that we do to try to make them perform a little bit better.
Are you thinking about changing the name of plasma caps? Because I think there's only 3 people, and they're all actually on this podcast right now, that understand that the damn name of that thing is plasma caps. It's not plasma caps.
Yeah.
That shit, that's like nails on a chalkboard for me, man.
I mostly blame that on autocorrect. I think it's people on their phones and they're like, you mean plasma? Sure, okay,
I mean, I see people, they're reading the bottle and they say plasma. I was like, holy shit, there's no A there. Stop it.
Yeah. This is the lightning or fire or the sun or serum in your blood. There's a lot of plasma definitions.
What drove the formulation? Because Specimen was one of the first products y'all released. What drove the formulation behind that? Were you crafting your ultimate pre-workout with that one, given your history of pre-workout formulations in the industry? What was kind of the methodology behind that madness?
I wouldn't plan like that at all. Not at all. My personal perspective on this, I personally think the pre-workout category has kind of become a bit of a mockery because you see beta-alanine, 3,200 milligrams, taurine, 1,000 milligrams, caffeine, 300 milligrams, and then you just the whole list of your usual suspects that you find in a pre-workout, and you're like, there's nothing. There's as far as talking about hitting your head on the ceiling, the pre-workout category is hitting its head on the ceiling over and over and over again. Because now you go into any kind of retailer and you start looking at the pre-workouts and you're like, Jesus Christ, the overlap is insane, And then at that point you're like, well, what kind of flavor do I want, And who's going to have the best bang for my buck on price and servings and flavor? That's what the pre-workout category essentially would get boiled down to. And with Specimen, we wanted to do those things. We wanted to like have our typical block of the same bullshit you're going to get in every other pre-workout. Yeah. That was the goal. And then on top of that, okay, where are the little tweaks we're going to make? There's the whole solution thing I was talking about earlier. The selection of stimulants was based off of what's not illegal, number one, because there's a lot of people with their DMAs and DMHAs and DMBAs and all the different, TLAs and 3-letter acronyms that you could possibly put, in your pre-workout where, is that stuff desired? Sure. But by a very small subset of the population. Yeah. And there's some retailers that are like, well, if you're not hardcore, I'm not going to sell it. And, that it was that pressure that was definitely involved in Specimen. And we're like, okay, how are we going to find a combination of stimulants that's going to deliver a similar type of effect? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's like a recurring theme across Glaxon is the copious use of niacin. And that's something that is in quite a few products, because niacin's actually pretty good and it has a lot of really good cardiovascular kind of effects, and it's a precursor to NAD and it does all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it makes you flush. And I think that's another thing that the pre-workout, community, if you will, they were looking for something. They were looking for something that they could feel. That's what everybody's looking for with a pre-workout. They want something they can feel. And this benchmark is pretty firmly established by beta-alanine and caffeine. And, how do you make that tingle a bit more spicy? And that's definitely where niacin came into the fold. Yeah. I, of course, wanted, 1,000, 2,000 milligrams, but, I don't think most people can handle that. Nope. And I kind of felt bad because, like, last week in the slice video, I'm here, I'm eating this capsaicin pepper and this capsule full of black peppers, mm-hmm. and I took 3 grams of niacin. And, I'm a guy who does take 2 grams of niacin a day, and I'm supposed to be turning red. And I'm like, if there was anyone else sitting in this chair right now, they would be purple. It would be completely purple, like purple from head to toe and behind your balls, purple, like not an inch spared. But, it was me. And I'm like, well, gosh, You know, it hasn't even been a day since I've abstained from my 2 grams of daily niacin. So I'm like, I had a little bit of flushing in my face and neck, but that's usually what it comes down to. So the thing about niacin for like the folks at home, it's temporary. You'll get over it. You're going to be fine. Okay. The splashing, you think you're going to have hives or an allergic reaction. That's all normal. But, there is a saturation with this. There is a tolerance that does build, just like with beta alanine or anything else, where you take this stuff and it's going to come and it's going to go. And a month into taking substantial niacin versus like day one of taking a substantial amount of niacin is like night and day. It's nothing at day 30, but on day one, you feel like you're going to die.
Yeah, I think that's one thing like I go through with a lot of people. I don't have a lot of compassion sometimes. I know Robert has even less than I do, but sometimes people are like, they're like, yeah, oh, I feel it makes me itchy. I'm like, shut the fuck! Like you're trying. You're like your whole goal is right. You're going to the gym and you're trying to have this like out of world experience, but don't make it uncomfortable. Please don't make my workout uncomfortable. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like enjoy that stuff. Like that's what you're after. But no, like oh well, what about a DMA product that you recommend? I'm like, okay, but niacin is where you're gonna draw the line, like because you can't possibly have that flush. So I get it, man. That's those pre-workouts definitely deliver on what you're talking about. I think one thing you hit on in there too. I don't know how much you're involved with this stuff, but you guys, it seems like you have a really important relationship with retailers. Like you decided, okay, we're going to go retail, and you're like all in, and you're obviously with some really big retailers right off the bat. I don't know how much you get involved in that stuff, but that seems like that's a lot of because then they take more money out of your pocket to sort of be your ambassadors of your products, and it's like then you have to change the formulas in a way because your margins have to be there. So how does that sort of like play into when you're making a formula or just you guys' business in general? I know it's kind of like a huge long topic, but retail seems to be important to you guys.
It is, and it's all about forming a good partnership. If you can create a product that is somewhat remarkable, then and especially if you can provide a decent profit margin, you have to create that win-win scenario, especially for brick and mortar retailers, because it's just so competitive these days. And a lot of times if they're buying from like a distributor or something, that's not going to be as profitable as going direct to the company because the distributor's got to make a cut too. And it's going to be hard for the industry to survive if profit margins do thin a little bit more, even though I wouldn't necessarily mind seeing that, but I don't want to see it like loaf of bread style profit margins either, because you're just not going to make that much stuff. And that's the other thing with like how saturated and competitive the industry is right now. You're eventually going to end up with companies either trying to maintain their profit margins or just start this weird like price war of profit margins as we all race to the bottom. And a lot of that's playing out right now in a lot of different ways. And and I would say like in the last 5 years we've seen certain legacy brands kind of rise, and we've also got this really odd, strange new wave of these other companies that are kind of doing things like as different as they can. And I love seeing this kind of stuff. I love seeing this kind of change that's coming through. And I'm talking like in flavor and in packaging design and all this other stuff the other companies are doing in a completely different and unique way. And I'm scrolling through Instagram and I'm like, damn, that's cool. I really like that. It's just, you see that kind of stuff and you're just like, okay, that's I like that. I like that, and I love being jealous of like other companies' products, like Axe and Sledge and the whiskey cola.
Badass, awesome. Badass,
fucking genius.
Yeah. They showed me that they were doing that, and they were like, "Hey, but don't tell anybody." I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? How am I not supposed to tell somebody about this?"
It's so cool. It's so cool. And they did a really good job. I like that.
Well, I think that's what's cool about like what you guys, I think, we talk a lot about this, we do the consulting thing, and a lot of people talk about branding and marketing. And anytime you see these people try to sort of copy other brands, it seems to fall flat because, and what you guys, I think you had we talked about like the fallout HP Lovecraft style kind of videos you guys were doing, and it sort of just kind of fits in. It fits in with what you guys like and what you guys do, and I think that that's what delivers. Like the Axe and Sledge thing, it's like, well, a lot of companies maybe could do that, but that company makes. I mean, that's perfect for them. It's like, so it seems like that type of branding. If you guys are really sticking to what you guys really like and going, hey man, we hope other people think it's cool too, that sort of resonates with people. And I think that that's why you guys have been, one reason why you've been so successful.
And I think this industry needs a sense of humor for sure.
Agreed.
A lot of these people, they take everything so seriously and everything. It's like, look, we can be innovative, but we're going to make jokes about it the whole time. You can be like completely absurd. And I love the concept of puffery in advertising, because you can make something that is something that's taken way seriously over here, and you can make fun of it, but you're still delivering a similar type of product and making the same kind of point, but you're just doing it in a different way. And I like seeing other brands now in this effort to break up the monotony and saturation, to take on the personality of whatever your company is going to be. And that's one of those things I think Axe and Sledge has done really well with. There's a handful of companies that are doing that kind of stuff, and they're owning their presence in ways that has not been done before. And I am in full support of all that.
Do you look at other brands, since you said you scroll through Instagram and you think certain things are cool? Do you view that as sources of inspiration? You see somebody do something cool, you say, I want to do that, but put a Glaxon spin on it instead, or you just say, hey, we've already got our vision, we know what we're doing. Everybody else, they can do whatever they want to. That's cool. They can be themselves, and we're going to keep doing our thing no matter what.
Scenario 2 is that you listed there is pretty well like our mindset. We're going to do what we're going to do. And sure, I'm not going to end up making a Jack Daniel's edition whiskey cola because I can't, because It's been done. Yeah. And it was done so well. It's like, don't touch that. They did a really good job, and I would consider that sacred ground right now. How are you going to come out and copy something like that? Because their execution was so well. And I there are times where I may see an ingredient or may see something, and I'll be like, the justice was not done there. And it sucks because there's a handful of really tiny companies that are out there that have some really smart people behind them, but they're just almost completely dark. They don't have a social media presence. They hardly have an address or phone number to contact them on their website. And yet they're doing these remarkable things, and nobody's shining a light on them. They're just in their corner doing their thing. And it's just like, man, I'd really hate to, use that ingredient, but it's a really good ingredient, and you're not doing what you should be doing with this. A lot more people should know about this. It's not beyond me to do that kind of stuff. There's plenty of trademarked and patented ingredients in our formulas and stuff, and a lot of that's not necessarily unique, but what it is unique is what it's also in there with the combinations of stuff that we have. But yeah, there's plenty of opportunities where you could derive inspiration. I think when it comes to our aesthetic and our company's personality and stuff, we've pretty well got that nailed.
Yeah.
And don't really plan on the changes we do plan on making are still completely different from anybody else in the industry as far as like our future path.
Yeah.
And I still plan on completely, assisting and as much as I can to blaze that trail in this direction that we're planning on going. And if you have a clear plan of what you're going to do, usually stuff that anybody else does really isn't going to rattle you or really be much of a blip on your radar. And that's freeing for me because I can look at stuff and say, that is cool. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to rip that off. That's just cool. And that can be cool. Yeah. And you can appreciate that kind of stuff without being like jealous or like having to rip this off or that off. Because like I said, we have a plan. We have a pretty decently long-term plan as far as what we're gonna do. And this is we're only 3 months old. We're 3 months into this. We're going on our fourth. A couple of days will be 4 months old.
Yeah.
So we haven't been around very long as a company as far as that's concerned. So there's definitely a long way to go. I know that Justin, he's just finished his first year of Snoop, and there's a lot that changes in 1 year. You know, the traction that guy's gained, it's incredible. But you know, a lot happens in a year, and all you got to really do for the most part is just show up. You know, he shows up every day and does his thing, and for that, you know, he's rewarded, and he gets that traction. And you know, I do one show a week. You know, I feel comfortable with that because I get to vomit out of my mouth a whole bunch of scientific jargon for 15 minutes. And if they pick it up, they pick it up. That's great. If they don't, maybe they'll Google it later and figure it out a little bit more. But you know, this is our round one is going to be the super duper deep information. We'll definitely double back and get a little bit more simplistic. I might not be the host of that segment. It may be someone who's digesting this down a little bit more and a little bit more easy for regular people. But I think to have all these different layers of the information that's there, I think that's particularly it makes it interesting. In my best case scenario, I hope to make everybody a little bit smarter in this process and having a more better educated consumer, because if we have that alone can kind of cut through the clutter of what we got going on right now.
Yeah, it can definitely drive change and hopefully force other companies in there to make better quality products as well. One thing I did want to ask Joey, and you've brought this up a couple of times, and I want us to delve into this a little bit if you can. You mentioned things about enhancing the payload of the supplements. You know, you have the DR caps when you use the capsule thing, but you also mentioned that you can play around with things within solution, and I don't think many of the listeners understand or have a full grasp of what you mean by how you can tweak things within the solution. Is it a matter of how much water you're telling them to mix with their products? Is it some of the other enzymes, vitamins, and minerals in there that are going to potentiate the uptake of some of those nutrients outside of things like estrogen and bioperine? You know, we all kind of know what those things are and how they work, but what else are you speaking to?
The magic of sweet, salty water. Other than that, as much as I'm going to tiptoe around that subject, some of those people might be kind of sharp and they'll figure this out on their own. They probably already do it figured out. I know there's definitely some people in the industry that already have this figured out. There's a lot of people that don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is my message on that one.
Perfect. Okay. One thing we see as obviously y'all are still very young, as you just mentioned. As companies grow, y'all also have a very effective business plan, I would say, because you've launched a number of products since you've only been around, 4 months technically. As we see companies grow, we tend to see them drift towards the middle. Formulas get very blah in the event to push bigger inventory, larger quantities of stuff. And, a company that once was kind of innovative and cool and trendy and edgy gets very kind of blah as they grow because they're obviously making more money. They want to increase their bottom line and all of that. Do you ever foresee a scenario where as y'all grow, and obviously the initial foundation is there to set y'all up for success, do you ever see that affecting the formulas in any way?
Yes, and to deny that would be foolish because with growth and with everything comes so much more scrutiny. And with more exposure, you're going to have more customers taking your products. And, there's a very serious possibility that you get some blip on your radar, someone, had an underlying medical condition or something that they didn't know about and ended up taking your product and had a very strange allergic reaction to a plant that they would have never come into contact with in their natural environment or something like that. That kind of risk does end up, increasing as your exposure ends up increasing. So you do, as the more you grow, you do kind of have to get a little bit more conservative. However, I kind of think that as long as, you try to still deliver, and I'm not talking like a bottom line kind of thing, because I'm pretty sure that like the bottom line thing, with scale and all that kind of does end up taking care of itself. And if we do have to make changes, that there will be compensation for those kinds of changes and other different formula features where you're just not taking something away. Because that's, as a consumer, I don't want to see a product that I've been buying for like 6 months and all of a sudden they've taken something away. I would feel bad about that. I would rather, if you got a tweak or if you're going to take something away, you better bring something else to the table if you want me to still continue buying your product. It's one of those things where me as a consumer, because believe it or not, I do go out and spend money on some supplements. So, I definitely, I'm sensitive to that kind of stuff because, like everybody at home, I'm one of you too. And, I've had several brands that were favorites of mine that, they either go extinct or they'll do a formula change that I don't like and I'll end up having to buy something else.
Hmm.
And, it's kind of sad to see that kind of stuff happen. But then again, at the same time, as they grow and as they reach this platform of becoming like this legacy brand, all that kind of stuff goes along with the growth.
Yeah.
It's my ambition with working with Glaxon and everything that we try to stay true to our integrity as much as we can. That even with growing, if there are some more conservative moves, that we will compensate for those appropriately.
Hmm.
And as I'd stated earlier, we definitely intend on amplifying and bettering our products as we go forward. And there's already been some pushback from a couple different retailers on certain ingredients that we may have to alter or change.
Hmm.
Stuff that on a very moralistic kind of standpoint that I completely disagree with.
Yeah.
Like, prime example, we're not talking DMHA or anything. We're talking solbutamine, the fat soluble version of vitamin B1.
Yeah, I love that ingredient too, by the way.
Me too.
It's on the chopping block. It's on the chopping block. And that particular compound has a very, very, very small risk of causing an adverse effect in anybody. Vinpocetine also falls into this category.
Yep.
Vinpocetine's been on the market for decades right now. And, Vitamin Shop pulled it in like 2015. And then now there's other different retailers that want nothing to do with vinpocetine at all.
Right.
But there's nothing else that does what vinpocetine does.
Correct.
At least not sufficiently. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, you can try to hit that same mechanism, but there's nothing like vinpocetine except for like, vincristine comes from the same plant. It's the natural form
Correct.
of vinpocetine,
Yeah.
but it's got a shit absorption rate. So, how are you going to compensate for that?
Exactly. And taking things home here, Joey, you have any advice to young formulators? Obviously, you don't have to give away the secret sauce, but do you have any advice for young people looking at want to make a career out of formulation or just want to do it as a side gig or maybe, help the brands they're currently with?
First move would be find a brand. Find a brand that if you've got some chops as a young formulator, go find a brand locally or close to you or fairly close to you that sucks, that you think sucks. You just go in there and be like, I'm going to help you out, okay? I'm going to help you out and make your shit that sucks a little bit better. We'll go that way. Because it's not like there's a readily available pool of formulators that are out there.
Correct.
I mean, are you going to go on Indeed.com and type in formulator and just cross your fingers that fucking Dymatize shows up? Number one, we're looking for a formulator. We're looking for a kid straight out of college. We're looking for you. Come over here. And you're not going to get that job with a big legacy brand. Not right off the bat. And there's all these different like inadvertent paths. You do exercise physiology, or maybe you become a bench scientist and you run rat studies on carnitine supplementation of rats or some bullshit like that, which isn't very fun or rewarding, and you're not making products. But it's a matter of like building that up. And I really don't think that's necessary because there are plenty of companies out there that are completely clueless. They're just making a buck.
Yep.
They would be happy to have someone like you knock on their door. But that's one way of doing it. Another way is like, I would probably go with more of a non-traditional degree path, like something like genetics and biochemistry, where you definitely understand things on a deeper level. But it's a little bit different than getting like a degree in nutrition, where you're just going to be able to tell what kind of macros you're kind of looking for.
Right.
And I don't really know what kind of classes you're gonna have trying to be a typical nutritionist that are gonna talk about natural products and the various gene pathways that something like green tea extract will activate.
Yeah.
But if you have that information on the gene pathways, and this kind of stuff is like background information, and then you start applying it, then it can make a little bit more sense. So I'm more of the mindset of biochemistry, genetics, or molecular cell biology. That's going to give you a better foundation than say going into like exercise or nutrition. Not to knock those things, because there's plenty of guys in this game that have those degrees that are great at what they do.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But but they'll even tell you they don't teach you this stuff in school. So it's more like And there's a huge amount of self-education that is involved in this. So if there's another thing I'm going to say, teach yourself. If you know how to teach yourself, that is the hands down most valuable tool you can ever develop in your entire life, to teach yourself. And if you can get that, then you can go anywhere. You can go build rockets.
Excellent. Well said, man. Well then, Joey, we've kept you on here for an hour and a half, and I'm sure we could go for easily a couple hours more jamming, but we will save that for part 2 of this trio.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us, man, and thank you too, Mr. Supplement Snoop. We appreciate it. I know it's getting on to your nap time as well, so we'll get moving on. And Joey, where can everybody find you and Glaxon, and why should they? You can shamelessly plug anything and everything you want to, my man.
Shameless plugs. I love that. You can find me at Supplement Lab on Instagram. If you go to YouTube and you look up Supplement Lab, you can find our videos on there. Or if you go to Glaxon.com, you can check out a lot of the videos and the different series that I've done for our products on each of the individual product pages. If you're not going to the Arnold this weekend, like all of you should check out Thermal, which is our new non-stimulant fat burner that we dropped day before yesterday. And the video for that is going to be going live, or is live now. So if you want to check that out, because this will be on Friday, so it'll have dropped yesterday. So that's going on. We're still running the sale that's all the way through the weekend. You can get 25% off because Price Plow gave us, or we gave Price Plow a code. So I think the code is Price Plow. You get 25% off Thermal through Sunday.
Cool. Excellent, man.
It's been great.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen.
Guys.
And
It's been fun.
have a good weekend.
All right. You up too.
All right. Thanks, man.